My cousin sabotaged my wedding by calling vendors to cancel, inviting my fiancé's ex, and bragging about it at a bar. When I uninvited her, she claimed I was excluding family who matter. 9 months later, she showed up in my backyard, wearing a wedding dress, laughing to herself at something only she could see. This isn't just a story about a bad wedding guest. This is about how my own cousin, the one I practically grew up with, meticulously tried to shatter my entire life. Not just my wedding, but my relationship, my peace, everything. All because of a shocking secret she'd been hiding about my fiancé. I'd been planning my wedding for over a year. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, a celebration of love, family, and new beginnings. I was so excited to share it with my closest friends and family, especially my cousin, Lauren. Lauren and I, we were inseparable as kids. We'd spent summers together, shared clothes, even planned imaginary weddings. But as we got older, something shifted. She became different. Jealous, petty, manipulative. Things I tried to ignore because, well, she was family. About 2 years ago, Lauren started acting really weird around me. She'd make these passive-aggressive comments about my clothes, my job, or my relationship with James, my fiancé. I remember telling her I got a promotion and she just shrugged. "Oh, that's cute. I'm sure it's just because they don't want to lose you yet." At family dinners, she'd roll her eyes if I talked about wedding plans, muttering, "Typical, spending way too much on things that don't matter." I tried to brush it off, telling myself she was just going through a rough patch. But it got worse after James proposed. Around 6 months before the wedding, Lauren started forgetting to RSVP to events, but then she'd just show up uninvited to my bridal showers or dress fittings. She acted like she was entitled to be everywhere, to know everything. At one dress fitting, she actually told me, right in front of the dressmaker, "I really don't get why you picked that style. It's so not you, but whatever. It's your day to embarrass yourself." The air just went cold. Everyone was so uncomfortable, but Lauren just smiled like she'd won. She even whispered rumors to some distant relatives claiming I was having second thoughts about James and might call off the whole wedding. When I confronted her, she just laughed. "Oh, I'm just trying to save you from making a huge mistake." 2 weeks before the big day, my maid of honor pulled me aside. She'd overheard Lauren texting James's ex-girlfriend, encouraging her to show up at the wedding to cause a scene and ruin our day. Then, the calls started coming in. My vendors, the florist, the caterer, even the DJ, complained that Lauren had contacted them trying to cancel or change orders last minute. She was telling them the wedding was off, or that I was too high maintenance. One night, my maid of honor even caught Lauren sneaking into the venue late, just to check things out. When confronted, she even sweetly chirped, "Oh, I'm just making sure everything's perfect for you. Aren't you lucky to have a cousin who cares this much?" The night before the wedding, James, my fiancé, came home utterly deflated. He told me Lauren had been bragging at a bar about her elaborate plan to ruin the entire thing. My heart just sank. I felt so utterly betrayed by someone I thought was family. I called Lauren, my voice shaking. When I confronted her directly, she got defensive, yelling, "You don't need me there to have a perfect wedding. You just want to exclude family who actually matter." That was it. The absolute last straw. This was my day, my celebration, and she was actively, maliciously, trying to sabotage it. I made the toughest decision. I uninvited her. I sent her a text, simple and blunt. "Lauren, you are no longer invited to my wedding. Please do not come." Her phone absolutely blew up with angry calls and texts. She screamed that I was a bridezilla. Dramatic, throwing a tantrum over nothing. She told all our relatives I'd gone crazy, cutting off family over nothing. But my real friends and family knew the truth. They'd seen Lauren's behavior, the texts to vendors, the vile rumors, the sneaking around. Without Lauren, the wedding was perfect. My family and friends were incredibly supportive, keeping an eye out for any trouble. But nothing happened. James was so proud of how I handled it. We danced all night, laughed, and finally just enjoyed our day without a shadow of doubt. A week later, Lauren tried to post pictures from that bar, hoping to make me look bad. But one of my friends had her back. She posted a video from the same night showing Lauren getting kicked out of the bar for causing an absolute scene, yelling and throwing drinks, screaming about how she was the real star. Everyone who saw it understood exactly who the problem was. Lauren's plan backfired spectacularly. She's still bitter, but now she's known as the family drama queen, the one who tried to destroy her own cousin's special day. I thought that was the end of it. A painful but resolved chapter. Then just last night, a mutual friend, Tyler, drunkenly let something slip. Something that turned my entire world upside down. The reason Lauren's been so utterly obsessed with me all these years? It isn't just pettiness. It's because James wasn't supposed to be my fiancé. According to Tyler, Lauren and James had dated for 2 whole years back in college. 2 years. James had never, not once, mentioned it to me in our 3 years together. Tyler kept drinking and talking, telling me how Lauren used to plan their entire future, down to the house they'd buy and their kids' names. She'd even picked out wedding venues and shown them to their friend group, acting like the engagement was just a formality. When James broke up with her after graduation to take a job in Minneapolis, Tyler said she completely lost it. She showed up at his apartment for weeks, calling his new employer, even following him to bars with his coworkers. James had to threaten a restraining order to get her to stop. And that's when Lauren suddenly decided to move to Minneapolis too, claiming it was for a fresh start. Really, it was just to stay close to him. The worst part, the part that made my blood run cold, was when Tyler mentioned Lauren introduced us at that barbecue 3 years ago on purpose, knowing James would be there. He saw her watching from across the yard as James and I hit it off, then spending the rest of the night crying in the bathroom. She orchestrated it. She set us up. That evening, my phone started ringing nonstop. It was Aunt Diane, Lauren's mom, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She kept yelling about how I was destroying the family with vicious lies about her daughter, claiming Lauren was in therapy for depression I caused with my bridezilla behavior. She threatened to sue me for defamation if I didn't apologize publicly and re-invite Lauren to family events. James, bless him, grabbed the phone from me and told her we had recordings of everything before hanging up. The next morning, my friend, Rachel, called me, her voice shaking. She explained what she'd found online. Lauren had been using a fake Instagram account to follow our every move for years, screenshotting all our posts and creating these creepy timelines with notes. Rachel sent me screenshots, comments like, "Dinner at Romano's, he took me there first," under a photo from our anniversary dinner. Or, "She doesn't know I tried it on first," under my engagement photos, talking about the dress I helped Lauren pick out. There were hundreds of these notes, documenting every single thing James and I did together, comparing them to things she'd supposedly done with him first. It was sickening. For days, I tried going back to work, trying to act normal. But I kept checking the doors and windows every few minutes, making sure they were locked. My supervisor pulled me aside, catching me staring at the security camera feed instead of working. She suggested I take some personal days to deal with whatever was going on. I told her I needed the routine to stay sane, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely type. That afternoon, a Facebook message popped up from Cassie Romano, James's ex-girlfriend from high school. She said she needed to talk to me urgently about Lauren. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Cassie looked around nervously before telling me Lauren had contacted her 6 months ago with an insane plan. She pulled out her phone and showed me messages where Lauren offered her $10,000 to seduce James at his bachelor party, complete with detailed instructions on what to wear and say to trigger his old feelings. Cassie had refused immediately but kept all the messages as insurance. She slid a USB drive across the table with everything saved on it. Lauren didn't. "Stop there," Cassie explained. She showed up at Cassie's workplace multiple times, followed her home, and sent anonymous letters to her boyfriend claiming she was cheating with James. Cassie had filed a police report but couldn't prove it. It was Lauren since she always wore disguises and used fake names. She gave me the case number and the detective's contact information, warning me that Lauren was way more dangerous than anyone realized. A week later, Marcus, our lawyer, came over to review everything we'd collected. He spread papers across our dining room table, shaking his head. He said we definitely had enough for a restraining order, but warned us that Lauren would be notified and would have a chance to respond in court, which might make things worse before they got better. Then he dropped another bomb. He'd pulled James's credit reports and found proof that Lauren had been using her position at the department store where she worked to illegally access his credit information. For months, tracking our purchases and knowing exactly how much we spent on the wedding. 2 weeks after Tyler's revelation, we finally filed for the restraining order at the courthouse. The clerk explained the hearing would be scheduled in 4 to 6 weeks and Lauren would be served papers within 5 business days. Marcus kept warning us to prepare for her to escalate once she got served. So we spent that afternoon installing security cameras around our apartment, checking every window, locking everything twice. That night, James completely broke down. He sobbed, admitting he felt responsible for not warning me about Lauren's past behavior. He told me about the time she showed up at his job during a company meeting, claiming to be his wife and saying there was a medical emergency, forcing security to physically remove her while his coworkers watched. He thought moving to Minneapolis and starting fresh would put enough distance between them, never imagining she'd follow him here and wait 3 years to make her move. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat up, scrolling through years of photos with Lauren on my phone, desperately, looking for signs I'd missed. In every single picture from the past 2 years, she'd positioned herself between James and me, or she was touching him somehow, a hand on his shoulder standing too close, leaning into him during group photos. It made my stomach churn. How did I not see it when it was right there in front of me the whole time? And what else was James hiding? The fact that Tyler had to drunkenly spill this huge secret made me wonder. The next morning, Rachel called again with more news that made my skin crawl. She'd found Lauren's Pinterest board titled My Dream Wedding. On it were exact copies of every single choice I'd made for our wedding. The venue, the flowers, the color scheme, even the exact same wedding dress from the same designer. And the creepiest part? The board was created 2 years before I even met James. And the dress was listed in my exact size, not hers. It was like she was planning my wedding for herself, before I even existed in James's life. 3 days after we filed the restraining order, Lauren got served the papers at her workplace during lunch hour. Within 60 minutes, James's phone started ringing with his boss saying there was a family emergency and he needed to come home immediately. I was getting frantic texts from his mom asking if it was true that I was having an affair with my personal trainer. My supervisor pulled me into her office because someone had called claiming James was abusing me and they were concerned for my safety. We'd warned everyone this might happen after Marcus told us Lauren would probably lash out. But hearing my boss ask if I needed help getting to a women's shelter made my hands shake uncontrollably. James and I spent the rest of that afternoon calling everyone, explaining what was really happening, sending copies of the restraining order to prove we weren't lying. The next morning, I heard pounding on our front door while James was in the shower. Through the peephole, I saw Aunt Diane and a man I recognized as Lauren's dad from old family photos. They pushed past me the second I cracked the door open, demanding we drop the restraining order immediately. Lauren's dad kept saying she was having a mental health crisis and needed family support, not legal action. Aunt Diane grabbed my arm and said, "Lauren just loved too hard sometimes." I pulled up one of Lauren's threatening messages on my phone, the one where she said she'd burn our house down before letting me keep James. Aunt Diane barely glanced at it before saying we must have misunderstood her daughter's quirky sense of humor. James came downstairs, still dripping from his shower, and told them to leave or he'd call the police. Lauren's dad started yelling about how we were destroying his daughter's life over nothing. They finally left when James actually dialed 911, but not before Aunt Diane whispered that family was supposed to protect each other. That night, around 3 in the morning, our phones started buzzing with motion alerts from the backyard camera. I grabbed my phone while James sat up, confused, and we both watched Lauren on the screen, standing in our backyard with a can of spray paint. She was wearing a wedding dress, the exact same one from her Pinterest board, the one that looked just like mine. The white fabric glowed eerily in the security light as she spray-painted "Home Wrecker" across our patio furniture in huge red letters. James called 911 while I kept watching, unable to look away, as Lauren started twirling in circles in the dress, her arms spread wide like she was dancing at a reception. She picked up our garden gnome and waltzed with it, humming something I couldn't hear through the camera. The dress caught on our rose bushes, but she kept spinning, tearing the fabric, laughing at something only she could see. Police lights filled our bedroom window 8 minutes later. We watched through the camera as 2 officers approached Lauren, who was now sitting on our patio chair in the ruined dress, painting her fingernails with the spray paint. She looked up at them and smiled, standing up slowly like she was greeting wedding guests. The officers cuffed her while she kept insisting she was just returning borrowed property. At the police station, the detective taking our statement suddenly looked up from his computer and asked if we knew a Cassie Romano. When we explained she was James's ex, he said Lauren's name had come up in 2 other reports from James's college friends claiming someone was stalking them. One girl said someone had been leaving dead roses on her car for months after she dated James' freshman year. Another said someone had called her workplace 50 times after James had asked her to a fraternity formal. The detective said they'd never been able to prove it was Lauren, but the pattern was clear now. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:30 with Aunt Diane sobbing on the other end. She begged me to drop the charges, saying Lauren was in psychiatric hold and this would ruin her entire life. She admitted Lauren had been obsessed with James since college, but insisted it was just misguided love that we could work through, as a family. I actually felt bad for a second, thinking about the cousin I used to play with as a kid, until Aunt Diane said we could have just shared him, that there was no reason to be selfish about a man when Lauren loved him first. I hung up without saying anything. A week later, Marcus called to warn us that Lauren had made bail, and her lawyer was claiming emotional distress and temporary insanity. He said she'd probably plea bargain down to a misdemeanor and get community service instead of jail time. That same afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was our wedding cake topper, the one from our actual wedding, smashed into dozens of pieces with a note that said, "This should have been mine," in Lauren's handwriting. James wanted to call the police again, but I was just so tired. I tried going back to work, pretending everything was normal, but Lauren's presence followed me everywhere. Coworkers whispered when I walked past, having heard different versions of the story from people who knew Lauren. My supervisor suggested I work from home for a while after someone left a printout of a news article about the arrest on my desk with "home wrecker" written across my photo. James and I ate dinner in silence most nights, both of us jumping at every noise outside, checking the cameras constantly, double-checking the locks before bed. We'd become prisoners in our own home. Then Tyler called, panicking because Lauren had shown up at his bar during his shift with an actual lawyer. She didn't scream or throw things this time, just calmly informed him she was suing him for defamation and breach of verbal contract about the wedding bartending. She had paperwork drawn up claiming he promised to bartend her wedding to James, and then broke that promise. Tyler's manager immediately put him on leave pending investigation, even though Tyler tried explaining the whole ridiculous situation. The next day, Rachel discovered Lauren had been posting in wedding shaming groups online, telling everyone I was the villain who stole her fiancé and her entire wedding plan. She'd posted photos comparing her Pinterest board to my actual wedding, claiming I'd copied everything from her. The post had hundreds of comments supporting her, calling me horrible names, saying I deserved whatever happened to me. Someone had even found our address from the wedding photographer's geotags and posted it in the comments. We started finding takeout menus on our porch with threatening messages written on them. James installed more cameras and changed our phone numbers, but the damage was spreading like wildfire. 3 weeks after Lauren's arrest, Cassie called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. Someone had sent her boyfriend dozens of old photos of her and James from years ago, but they'd been edited to look recent with timestamps from last month. Her boyfriend thought she'd been cheating and had already moved out. When Cassie texted Lauren demanding to know why she'd do this, Lauren responded with, "You should have helped me when you had the chance," along with a photo of the outside of Cassie's apartment building taken that very morning. 3 weeks later, I sat in the courthouse waiting room with my hands shaking so bad I couldn't hold my coffee cup steady. James squeezed my shoulder as Marcus reviewed our evidence folder one more time, checking that we had all the security, footage, and vendor recordings organized. The door opened and Lauren walked in, wearing a pale blue dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a church service. Her hair pulled back in a simple bun, no makeup except maybe some lip gloss. Her lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit, carried a thick folder and whispered something to her that made her nod and lower her eyes like she was about to cry. She sat across from us and kept her head down, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, even though I couldn't see any actual tears. When they called us into the courtroom, Lauren's lawyer went first, pulling out a letter from a therapist saying she had adjustment disorder, from being excluded from family events and needed treatment, not legal punishment. He painted this whole picture of how we'd ganged up on her, first uninviting her from the wedding, then pressing charges, now trying to get a restraining order against someone who just wanted to reconnect with family. I watched the judge's face soften as the lawyer talked about Lauren seeking mental health treatment and trying to better herself. Marcus stood up next and started calm, showing the vendor recordings where Lauren tried to cancel our flowers and catering, the texts she sent to James's ex, the photos from the bar where she bragged about ruining the wedding. Then he pulled out his laptop and connected it to the court screen. And suddenly, there was Lauren on video, standing in my wedding venue at midnight wearing a white dress. Not just any white dress, but one that looked exactly like mine, twirling in front of the mirror and taking selfies. The timestamp showed this was 3 nights before my wedding. Lauren's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him off, leaning forward to watch as Lauren in the video started practicing walking down the aisle, even holding an invisible bouquet. That's when Lauren lost it completely. She jumped up from her chair and started screaming that I stole her life, that James was supposed to be hers, that I took everything from her. The bailiff had to step forward as she kept yelling about how I'd turned everyone against her and ruined her future. The judge banged his gavel 3 times before Lauren finally sat down, her face red and twisted with rage. He granted the 2-year restraining order on the spot, telling Lauren she couldn't come within 500 feet of me, James, or our home. Outside the courthouse, we didn't celebrate at all. I thought it was over, until I saw Aunt Diane waiting by the door. She walked straight up to me, and before I could react, her hand cracked across my face so hard my ears rang. She screamed that I destroyed their family, that I was a selfish Bachrusier who couldn't let Lauren be happy, that I'd turned her daughter into a criminal over petty jealousy. Security guards rushed over and pulled her away, but not before someone's phone captured the whole thing. And by that night, the video was all over our local Facebook groups with captions like, "Wedding drama tears family apart," and "Bride's vendetta against cousin goes too far." 2 days later, James and I lay in our bed staring at the ceiling, both of us exhausted from not sleeping. He told me his boss had pulled him aside about his performance dropping. And I admitted my anxiety was so bad I'd thrown up at work, twice that week. We talked about moving to a different city, starting fresh where nobody knew about this mess, but that felt like letting Lauren win after everything we'd been through. James suggested we try therapy instead, both together and separately, to deal with what felt like trauma from the past few months. Our first session was awkward, sitting on a beige couch explaining to a stranger how my cousin had tried to destroy my wedding because she used to date my husband. The therapist, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes, suggested I write Lauren a letter I'd never send, just to get my feelings out on paper. I sat at our kitchen table that night, writing page after page about how she'd watched me fall in love with James, knowing their history, helped me pick out wedding decorations while planning to ruin everything, smiled at me while stabbing me in the back. The betrayal felt deeper than I'd let myself admit, like finding out someone you trusted had been planning your destruction all along. Just when I thought maybe we could start healing, Marcus called with news that made my stomach drop. Lauren's criminal lawyer had gotten the charges reduced to misdemeanor trespassing with time served, meaning she was free and clear except for the restraining order. That same night, James's parents called in a panic because they'd received a package, with printed emails supposedly from James to Lauren, saying he still loved her and was only with me for my family's money. Which was ridiculous since my family didn't have money. The emails were obviously fake but sophisticated, with headers that looked real and dates that matched up with actual events, making James's mom question if maybe there was some truth to them. A month after the hearing, I walked into my office to find my entire desk covered in white roses, the exact flowers from my wedding bouquet. Security footage showed a legitimate delivery person from a real florist dropping them off. And when we called the shop, they said the order was placed online using my credit card number. I pulled out my wallet and stared at my credit card, sitting right there where it always was, never missing, never stolen. The IT department traced the order to a VPN that made it impossible to track who really placed it, but I knew it was her. Finding ways to violate the restraining order without technically violating it. Rachel came to stay with me for a few nights because she was worried I might have a breakdown. We sat on my couch drinking wine while she tried to distract me with our wedding photos. But even the happy pictures felt wrong now, like Lauren's shadow was in every shot, even though she wasn't there. Rachel mentioned her boyfriend thought we should hire a private investigator to document all of Lauren's violations, build a case that she was still harassing us despite the court order. Meanwhile, Tyler was dealing with his own nightmare because Lauren had filed a lawsuit claiming he'd agreed to bartend her future events for free as a wedding gift to us, then defamed her by spreading lies about her planning to poison people. His lawyer said fighting it would cost at least $10,000 in legal fees, money Tyler didn't have. James and I offered to help pay, but Tyler's pride wouldn't let him accept. Instead, he started showing up to work smelling like whiskey, missing meetings, falling apart in front of everyone. The private investigator we finally hired called with information that made my skin crawl. Lauren had rented an apartment using her mother's maiden name, positioning herself exactly 501 feet from our house, just barely outside the restraining orders requirement. She'd also legally changed her last name on social media to Thornon, my married name, claiming it was her professional name for her new photography business. The worst part was what the investigator found on her Instagram. Hundreds of photos of our house taken from her apartment window with a telephoto lens, posted with captions about architectural studies and urban landscapes. The investigator showed us one photo where she'd zoomed in on our bedroom window at night with a caption, "Studying light patterns in residential architecture." It made my skin absolutely crawl. 6 weeks after the hearing, things got worse for Cassie when her boyfriend dumped her after Lauren sent him fake screenshots of Cassie supposedly texting other guys and talking about how she was just using him for money. Cassie called me crying that night, saying she couldn't take it anymore and was going to meet Lauren to try to make it stop. James and I both told her not to go, that Lauren was dangerous and unpredictable, but Cassie said she had nothing left to lose. She met Lauren at a Starbucks downtown and secretly recorded their whole conversation on her phone. Lauren sat there, stirring her latte, and told Cassie she'd make all the harassment stop if Cassie would just go public with a statement saying I'd manipulated James into leaving her, that I'd poisoned him against his old friends, and that she'd witnessed me being controlling and abusive. Lauren even offered to write the statement for her and said she had contacts at local news stations who would run the story. Cassie played along, asking questions to get more details, and Lauren got excited, talking about how they could destroy my reputation, and maybe James would finally see the truth. When Cassie brought us the recording the next morning, we thought we finally had enough to get Lauren arrested. The detective listened to the whole thing, shaking his head, then explained that Lauren had been too careful with her words, never making direct threats, just implications and suggestions. He told us to keep documenting everything and wait for her to cross a clear legal line, then admitted quietly that stalkers like Lauren usually escalate until they do something that can't be ignored. Marcus came over that weekend looking exhausted, admitting his girlfriend was thinking about breaking up with him because he'd become so obsessed with helping us build our case against Lauren. He'd been working pro bono for months, researching stalking laws and precedents late into the night, missing dates and family events. His girlfriend was scared of how consumed he'd become, worried that Lauren's obsession was spreading like a disease through our whole family. 2 months after the hearing, I found an unexpected ally. My supervisor pulled me aside at work. She noticed I'd been jumpy and distracted, so I told her everything about Lauren. Her face went pale, and she told me her ex-husband had stalked her for 3 years after their divorce. She immediately adjusted my schedule to make my hours unpredictable, letting me work from home some days and varying my office days so Lauren couldn't track my movements as easily. Small acts of kindness like that kept me from completely falling apart. Rachel called me one afternoon with disturbing news from her investigation into Lauren's online activity. She discovered Lauren had been messaging 3 of James's ex-girlfriends from high school and college, trying to create what she called a support group for James's victims on Facebook. 2 of the women had immediately blocked her and warned James, but one named Amanda seemed interested in whatever Lauren was selling. We had no idea what Lauren was planning with this. A few days later, Amanda called us directly and asked to meet at a coffee shop near the university. She sat down with her laptop and showed us emails and recorded phone calls from Lauren offering her $5,000 to claim James had been abusive during their relationship in college. Amanda had refused, but pretended to consider it to gather evidence of what Lauren was doing. The recordings were clear as day. Lauren coaching Amanda on what to say, promising that once the story went viral, there would be interviews and maybe even a book deal about surviving abuse. Amanda said she'd dated James for only 3 months freshman year, and it ended because they had different class schedules. Nothing dramatic, definitely nothing abusive. Our therapist suggested we take a weekend away to reset and get some distance from the chaos. We drove 2 hours north to a cabin near the lakes, but even there, we couldn't relax. Every car that passed on the dirt road made us tense up. Every unexpected noise from the woods had us checking the locks. Lauren had trained us to live in constant fear, even when she wasn't anywhere near us. While we were at the cabin, Lauren made her next move. She called my employer with an anonymous tip, claiming I was embezzling company funds. Even though the accusation was quickly disproven when they checked the books, an official investigation had to be launched according to company policy. My reputation took a huge hit as word spread through the office, and HR placed me on administrative leave while they verified every transaction I'd handled in the past year. The timing was perfect for maximum humiliation, right before the quarterly meeting where I was supposed to present a major project. My mom called me crying a week later, saying Aunt Diane had been begging her to arrange a family meeting to resolve everything peacefully. Mom kept saying family should forgive each other, that I was being too harsh, that maybe we could all sit down and talk it out like adults. I refused, but the guilt ate at me for days, making me question whether I was the one destroying the family or if Lauren had already done that. Tyler finally got his day in court for the defamation lawsuit. The judge dismissed it as completely frivolous, ordering Lauren to pay all his legal fees. But the victory felt hollow when Tyler told us his bar's reputation was ruined. Customers still whispered about the wedding poisoner story whenever he worked, and drunk people would joke about checking their drinks. He decided to move to Portland for a fresh start. Another life completely derailed by Lauren's obsession. The private investigator Marcus hired called me at 2 in the morning with photos that made my blood run cold. Lauren was standing outside our house talking to some guy in a van marked with a tech company logo, handing him cash while pointing at our bedroom window. The next morning, James found a small device stuck under his car's dashboard when he dropped his phone, and the PI's tech friend confirmed it had been recording audio for 3 weeks straight. We took everything to the police station, but the detective just shook his head after making some calls. Lauren's lawyer was already there, claiming she'd hired a security consultant to check on James because she was worried about his mental state after our harassment campaign. Without video of her personally planting the device, or the guy admitting she hired him for illegal surveillance, they couldn't prove criminal intent. The restraining order violation was clear, but the prosecutor said judges were getting tired of what looked like a family feud. 3 months dragged by with more legal meetings and dead ends. James started having panic attacks at work whenever a blonde woman walked past his office, his hands shaking so bad he couldn't type. His boss pulled him aside after a presentation where he completely froze up seeing someone who looked like Lauren in the back row. His performance review mentioned his recent distractions and lack of focus, and the promotion he'd worked 2 years for went to someone else. He came home that night and just sat on the couch staring at nothing for an hour. Amanda, the friend, who tried to help us earlier, finally agreed to go public with Lauren's bribery attempt from months ago. Marcus coordinated with us to file a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, adding up therapy bills, lost wages from James's missed promotion, and the thousands we'd spent on security cameras and the PI. The paperwork alone took weeks to prepare. Going back to work after the investigation cleared me felt like walking into a funeral, where I was somehow both the corpse and the mourner. My desk neighbor whispered to others when she thought I wasn't looking, and people stopped talking. When I entered the break room, some gave me sad smiles like I had cancer. Others avoided eye contact completely, like my drama might be contagious. My boss kept asking if I needed time off, with that careful voice people use with someone fragile. I wanted to quit so badly, but that would mean Lauren won. 4 months after the restraining order hearing, Amanda called me sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Her supervisor had received anonymous emails with edited recordings that made it sound like Amanda was extorting money from a vulnerable woman. The hospital suspended her pending investigation, even though she'd been a nurse there for 8 years with a perfect record. She kept apologizing for ever trying to help us, saying she should have stayed out of it. The guilt of dragging another innocent person into Lauren's crosshairs made me physically sick. Rachel discovered Lauren's newest game when wedding. Venues started calling us confused about our upcoming ceremony. Lauren had been visiting every high-end venue in Minneapolis, introducing herself as James Thornton's fiancé, booking consultations, tasting cakes, and picking out flower arrangements. One coordinator even sent us photos from their security camera of Lauren trying on veils in their showroom, telling the staff about how James had finally chosen the right woman. She was living out the wedding she never got to have, using our names like they belonged to her. The calls kept coming for weeks. Then Cassie tried to kill herself. The hospital called James as her emergency contact at 3 in the morning, and we rushed there to find her unconscious with machines keeping her alive. The note she left blamed everything on the situation with Lauren, said she couldn't handle the destruction of her life, the loss of her job, her reputation, everything she'd built. Her parents showed up screaming at us in the waiting room, threatening to sue us for dragging their daughter into our mess. Security had to separate us while Cassie fought for her life 3 rooms away. She survived, but she wouldn't see us. 2 weeks later, I completely broke down in therapy, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. The therapist said we were experiencing something like psychological terrorism, a sustained campaign designed to break us mentally and emotionally. She recommended inpatient treatment for PTSD. But I couldn't leave James alone to face this. Not when he was barely holding himself together. We were trapped with no good options. The civil suit finally moved forward, but Lauren's lawyer immediately countersued for defamation, emotional distress, and violation of privacy. They painted her as a heartbroken woman who'd been victimized by our campaign of harassment and false accusations. Marcus had been doing so much pro bono, but he finally had to tell us he couldn't keep working for free, and the bills were already over $15,000 with no end in sight. That same week, my phone rang from an unknown number, and when I answered, a woman said she'd been Lauren's roommate in college and had something important to tell us. She drove 3 hours to meet us at a coffee shop near the courthouse. She pulled out a thick folder full of papers and photos from her bag. Inside were pages and pages of Lauren's handwriting from years ago, detailed plans about James and their future together. The roommate showed us entries where Lauren wrote about getting rid of any girl who got close to James. She had photos of a closet shrine Lauren kept with things she'd stolen from James's dorm room. The roommate said she was willing to testify about everything she'd seen and documented over their 2 years living together. Marcus immediately set up a deposition for her testimony, while we tried to process this new chilling information. 5 months after the first hearing, James's parents invited us to their anniversary dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. We were checking our phones in the parking lot when I saw her sitting by the window. Lauren had picked a table just outside the restraining order distance, wearing the exact same dress I was wearing. Throughout dinner, I watched her order whatever. I ordered and copy every movement I made. When the waiter asked her something, she looked right at me and mouthed the words, "I do," with a smile that made my skin crawl. James's dad wanted to call the police, but technically, she wasn't breaking any laws by being there. We left early, and I threw up in the parking lot from the sheer stress. The next day, we met with a security consultant who specialized in stalking cases. He looked at our restraining order paperwork and shook his head. He explained that paper orders only work if the person cares about consequences. He spent hours teaching us how to vary our routes to work and scan for surveillance. He helped us lock down our social media and showed us how to document everything properly. The new routines were exhausting, but we followed them religiously. 2 weeks later, Tyler called from his new job in Chicago, where he'd moved to get away from all this. Lauren had found his workplace and was calling his boss with stories about his drinking problem and inappropriate behavior. He was already on probation as a new employee and couldn't afford to hire a lawyer. We wired him $2,000 we didn't have, adding it to our growing credit card debt. 6 months after the original hearing, the former roommate finally gave her deposition in uninvited Marcus's office. She testified about finding Lauren's journals with entries dating back 8 years. She described the shrine in detail, including James's old student ID and pieces of his clothing. Then she dropped the biggest bombshell when she mentioned Lauren had poisoned her own roommate's cat because the girl had gone on one date with James. The lawyer taking the deposition looked sick as she described Lauren's detailed plans for their future children's names. Lauren's lawyer immediately filed motions to exclude all the roommates' testimony as prejudicial and irrelevant to the current case. The judge scheduled a chambers review while we waited to hear if any of this evidence would be allowed. Meanwhile, Lauren had started seeing a therapist who was writing glowing letters about her remarkable progress and commitment to healing. Marcus discovered she was attending 3 sessions a week and getting documentation for everything. The stress was destroying my marriage in ways Lauren never could have done directly. James and I hadn't been intimate in 2 months because we were both too exhausted and paranoid. We tried going on a date night to reconnect, but spent the whole time checking exits and watching for her. Every car that looked like hers made us tense. What she couldn't destroy at our wedding, she was slowly eroding through this constant gnawing fear. Rachel's boyfriend proposed to her, but asked that James and I not attend their wedding to avoid drama with Lauren. Rachel threw the ring back at him and ended the engagement that same night. She showed up at our door with 2 suitcases, joking darkly that we should start a support group for Lauren's victims. Her moving in actually helped because we had someone else who truly understood what we were going through. 7 months after the hearing, we got a call from someone claiming to be Lauren's therapist, requesting a joint session for closure and healing. We declined immediately, but she kept calling, leaving messages about how our refusal showed we weren't interested in resolution. Marcus warned us this could be used against us in court to paint us as the aggressors who wouldn't even try therapy. The therapist's name sounded familiar, so I did some digging online. Turns out she was Lauren's cousin on her father's side, fully licensed, but clearly not impartial. We filed a complaint with the licensing board, but they said the investigation would take at least 6 months. Every system designed to protect victims had loopholes that Lauren knew exactly how to exploit. The next 3 months passed in a blur of legal meetings and evidence gathering, while Lauren kept escalating her behavior. She showed up at James's office claiming to be his wife and tried to access his medical records at 3 different hospitals. Security footage from his building showed her attempting to pick the lock to our apartment at 2 in the morning before a neighbor called the cops. She posted photos of herself wearing what looked exactly like my wedding dress on social media, with captions about reclaiming what was stolen. Rachel found 17 different fake accounts Lauren was using to message our friends and family members, with lies about James having affairs and me being pregnant with another man's baby. The restraining order violations piled up, but the prosecutor kept saying we needed more for serious charges. Then everything changed when Tyler's roommate from college reached out with a box of Lauren's old journals he'd kept after she moved out. The pages were filled with detailed fantasies about James, including plans to drug me at parties and make it look like I cheated, sketches of our future children with their names already picked out, and a timeline of when she planned to get him back that started 2 years before my wedding. Marcus hired a private investigator who discovered Lauren had been fired from 3 jobs in the past year for stalking male coworkers who resembled James. 8 months after that first threatening voicemail, we finally got our day in court for the civil trial. Lauren walked into the courtroom looking thin and pale, her hair unwashed, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her lawyer immediately started painting her as a heartbroken woman who just loved too deeply, a victim of cruel rejection who deserved sympathy, not punishment. Our lawyer presented the evidence methodically, but I could see some jurors looking at Lauren with pity as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. When James took the stand to describe the relentless harassment, Lauren suddenly stood up and screamed that I had drugged him, that I was a gold digger who had stolen her soulmate, that he had promised to marry her first. The judge banged his gavel and threatened her with contempt while her lawyer frantically tried to calm her down and requested a recess for his client's emotional state. That night, my phone rang, and it was Aunt Diane, sobbing to my mother, about how Lauren had tried to kill herself twice in college after James broke up with her. How the family had spent their savings on treatment. How I was pushing her toward another attempt by pursuing this case. My mom tried to stay neutral, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice when she asked if maybe we should consider dropping the charges. The next morning, Cassie agreed to testify via video link from the psychiatric facility, where she was recovering from her own suicide attempt after months of Lauren's harassment. She described how Lauren had called her job pretending to be a patient filing complaints, had sent explicit photos to Cassie's father claiming they were from her, had broken into her car, and left dead roses on the seat. Some jurors were crying, as Cassie talked about losing everything because of Lauren's obsession with James, but Lauren just sat there sketching in a notebook like she was bored. Tyler's old roommate testified next about finding Lauren's shrine to James in their apartment, complete with hundreds of photos, including ones taken through his bedroom window, the detailed journals planning their future together, and the poisoned cat that died after Lauren fed it antifreeze because it belonged to a girl James had briefly dated. Lauren's lawyer objected constantly, but the judge allowed it as pattern evidence. And when the roommate described finding the cat, Lauren actually started laughing before her lawyer grabbed her arm, forcing her to be quiet. During the lunch break on day 3, James and I sat in the courthouse cafeteria, pushing food around, our plates, both too stressed to eat anything. An elderly woman approached our table and leaned in close, whispering that she wasn't supposed to talk to us, but she was on the jury and wanted us to know that girl was clearly disturbed and we shouldn't worry. She walked away before we could respond, and we just sat there stunned that a juror had broken protocol to reassure us. When Lauren took the stand in her own defense, she transformed into a completely different person, speaking softly about how she and James had been each other's first loves, how I had known about their history and deliberately seduced him to hurt her, how she was just trying to protect him from someone who didn't really love him. She looked directly at James the entire time, tears streaming down her face as she talked about their special connection, and how I had poisoned him against her, manipulated him into forgetting their promises to each other. During cross-examination, Marcus presented the security footage of Lauren breaking into the bridal shop and trying on wedding dresses while telling the staff she was James's fiancé. Lauren claimed she was processing her grief, and the dress was symbolic of dreams that had been stolen from her by my manipulation. When shown the threatening messages she'd sent to me, Cassie, and Rachel, she insisted they were misinterpreted expressions of pain from someone whose heart had been shattered. Her performance was incredible, and I could see at least 2 jurors nodding sympathetically as she spoke. The jury deliberated for 2 days while we waited in agony for their decision. Rachel stayed at our apartment and spent the time monitoring social media, where she discovered Lauren had been live tweeting the entire trial under fake accounts, spinning herself as a victim of narcissistic abuse, posting edited photos and out-of-context quotes to make James and me look like the villains. Hundreds of strangers were commenting their support for Lauren, calling me horrible names, even starting a fundraiser for her legal fees that had already raised thousands of dollars. The next morning, we walked into that courtroom for the verdict, and I could feel every eye on us. The jury foreman stood up and read from a paper in his shaking hand. They found Lauren liable for intentional infliction of emotional distress and awarded us $50,000 in damages. Lauren jumped up from her chair and started screaming that we'd destroyed her life. She pointed at James and yelled that he would realize his mistake someday. Court officers grabbed her arms as she kept shouting, "This isn't over!" while her family glared at us with pure hatred. Outside the courthouse, we didn't celebrate at all. The money wouldn't even cover our legal fees, therapy costs, or the wages we'd lost from missing work. Tyler had moved to another state. Cassie was still in the hospital, and Amanda was still suspended from her job. We won the case, but it felt completely hollow. James held me while reporters shouted questions we didn't answer. A week later, Marcus called to tell us Lauren had filed for bankruptcy to avoid paying the judgment. He explained this was predictable since stalkers rarely pay what they owe. She'd also filed an appeal, which meant this whole nightmare would continue for months or even years. The legal victory felt more and more pointless. We tried going back to normal life, but we were different people now. James went back to work and I returned to my routine, but we were exhausted and jumpy all the time. Our therapist said healing would take years, and we started looking at houses in other states. Maybe distance would help us feel safe again. 2 weeks after the verdict, everything changed. At midnight, Lauren showed up at our house pounding on the door. She was screaming that she was pregnant with James's baby. Our security cameras caught everything as she kicked the door and threw rocks at our windows. She was clearly having some kind of breakdown, but the threat felt completely real. Police arrested her within 10 minutes of our call. This time the violation was impossible to deny. Lauren got charged with criminal stalking, violating the restraining order, and harassment. Her lawyer asked for a psychiatric evaluation instead of jail time. The prosecutor told us she'd probably get mandatory treatment rather than prison, but at least it was something. During Lauren's psychiatric hold, investigators went to her apartment. The walls were covered with hundreds of photos of James and me. Our wedding photos had my face scratched out with red marker. There were fertility tracking charts with James's name written all over them. They found notebooks full of plans to kidnap James for his own good and bring him somewhere safe. The detective showed Aunt Diane the photos from Lauren's apartment, and she finally broke down. She cried and apologized for enabling Lauren all these years. She admitted she knew something was wrong but couldn't face the truth about her daughter. She agreed to support involuntary commitment if the doctors recommended it. Lauren's psychiatric evaluation revealed severe delusional disorder with erotomanic features. The psychiatrist testified that Lauren genuinely believed James loved her and I was the only obstacle. She thought their college relationship never really ended, and everything since was fake. She was deemed incompetent to stand trial and needed long-term psychiatric treatment. The judge ordered Lauren to undergo mandatory inpatient psychiatric treatment at a secure facility for at least 2 years. She would have regular evaluations and couldn't contact us directly or indirectly ever again. Any violation would result in criminal prosecution and prison time. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at James one last time and mouthed, "Wait for me." 2 weeks after the hearing, we drove to the secure psychiatric facility where Lauren would spend at least the next 2 years. The building sat 40 miles outside Minneapolis, surrounded by high fences and security cameras. James gripped my hand as we walked through metal detectors and signed waivers. The facility director, a tall man with kind eyes, led us to his office, past locked doors that buzzed open one at a time. He spread out Lauren's treatment plan on his desk, pointing to different phases of her care. She'd get intensive therapy 3 times a week, daily medication management, and something called reality testing work. He couldn't promise she'd ever fully accept that James never loved her, but she'd be monitored 24/7 and medicated to prevent any more dangerous behavior. It wasn't exactly justice, but sitting there looking at those locked doors, I felt the first real safety in 8 months. 3 days later, Tyler flew back from Portland where he'd been hiding since everything exploded. We all met at Rachel's apartment. Me, James, Tyler, Rachel, and even Amanda joined us on video call from Arizona. We sat in a circle on Rachel's living room floor, passing around a bottle of wine and finally talking about everything Lauren had done to us. Tyler was rebuilding his photography business after losing most of his clients. Amanda was fighting to get her nursing license reinstated after Lauren's false reports. We were all in therapy, all taking medication for anxiety, all jumping at unexpected noises. Lauren had broken each of us in different ways, but looking around that circle, I realized we'd all survived. That same week, a letter arrived from Cassie at her own treatment facility in California. Her handwriting was shaky, but her words were clear. She was doing better, working through not just Lauren's harassment, but older traumas it had triggered, from an abusive ex in college. She forgave us for inadvertently dragging her into this mess and hoped we could all heal. She even mentioned her ex-boyfriend had reached out to apologize for not believing her about the stalking. The next big decision came when our lease renewal arrived. Part of me wanted to run, to move somewhere Lauren had never been, but James pointed out that would be letting her win one last victory. Instead, we spent a weekend repainting every room, buying new furniture, hanging new pictures. We threw a proper housewarming party with discreet security guards Rachel's husband had hired. Our friends filled every room, laughing and eating and making new memories. For the first time in months, our home felt like ours again. A month. After Lauren's commitment, James and I started couples therapy specifically for trauma recovery. The therapist, a woman who specialized in stalking victims, helped us learn to be close again without constantly looking over our shoulders. We practiced being intimate without Lauren's shadow between us. Some days the therapist said we were remarkably resilient, but most days we didn't feel it. I went back to work full-time with special accommodations for my therapy appointments. My supervisor moved me to a position with less public interaction, claiming it was a business decision, but I knew it was kindness. My coworkers stopped whispering when I walked by. the story became old news. Normal life crept back in tiny ways, like being able to grocery shop without checking every aisle first. 4 months into Lauren's treatment, her doctor called with an update. She was responding to the antipsychotic medications, though she still insisted James had been confused about his feelings rather than accepting he'd never loved her. The doctor said this was actually progress, that she'd moved from complete delusion to partial acceptance. Recovery, if it happened at all, would be measured in years, not months. On our first wedding anniversary, James surprised me with something I never expected. He'd arranged a vow renewal ceremony in our backyard with just Rachel and Marcus present. No vendors to sabotage, no extended family to cause drama, no elaborate plans to ruin. Rachel joked it was the wedding we should have had all along. James had written new vows about surviving darkness and choosing each other even when choosing felt impossible. We started building new traditions Lauren had never touched. Sunday mornings at the farmer's market where we'd buy too many tomatoes. Thursday night cooking classes where James learned to make pasta from scratch, little things she'd never known about and couldn't taint with memories. Layer by layer, day by day, we built a life she'd never been part of. The hypervigilance faded slowly but steadily. 6 months into Lauren's treatment, an envelope arrived with the facility's return address. Inside was a single page. Lauren's handwriting more controlled than I'd ever seen it. The letter was brief, clearly supervised, and shocking in its clarity. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I'm working on understanding reality. Please live your lives without fear of me. James wanted to throw it away, but I framed it instead. Not as forgiveness, because I'd never forgive her for what she put us through, but as evidence that sometimes broken people can begin to heal, and more importantly, that the people they broke can heal too.